Another injury-riddled night for the Toronto Raptors and another injury-riddled loss to the Cleveland Cavaliers. On today's show, we will dig into what actually matters from this past week of basketball. It's seen the Raptors go 2-5 since the All-Star break without Fred VanVleet and OG Anunoby. We'll also talk about Nick Nurse, and does he take some blame for the lack of depth coming off the Raptors bench? Plus, we got the dude of the game to hand out and a whole bunch more, all coming up on today's episode of Locked On Raptors with Vivek Jacob from Raptors.com. Thanks for being here.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1132 of Locked On Raptors for Monday, March the 7th. I'm your host, Sean Woodley of RaptorsHQ.com. You can find me on Twitter as always at WoodleySean. You can find the show at Locked On Raptors. And of course, you can find the podcast free and available on all your favorite podcast platforms in audio form. Please go follow, subscribe, rate, review, etc. Plus, you can go to YouTube and hit the big red subscribe button and join the nearly 1,700 satisfied customers who have done the same for Locked On Raptors. So please go and do that. And as always, a big thank you for making us your first listen of the day. All right, on today's show, the Raptors lost again, folks. They lost without Fred VanVleet and OG Anunoby, and also Malachi Flynn in Cleveland on Sunday, a game that had a lot of implications for the standings, and the result of which now kind of leaves the Raptors looking pretty comfortably as the projected 7th seed in the Eastern Conference. We'll dig into that. Plus, it really exposed how weak this bench really can be. Here to talk about all that, to handle the dude of the game and more, is our pal Vivek Jacob from Raptors.com. Big V, how you doing, pal?
I'm doing all right. Raptors could be doing a whole lot better, but I think I think it was always going to be a tough stretch coming out of the break, playing 6 games in 8 nights, and you have Fred VanVleet out, and obviously we know the OG Anunoby situation, so it doesn't help that Gary Trent Jr. is going through what he's going through, but you just hope that for once you might be able to take Nick Nurse's word when it comes to an injury, and when he says he's hopeful that Fred VanVleet can be back for the game coming up on Wednesday against the Spurs. You hope that to be true, but hey, Fred might miss another week or so, and that wouldn't surprise me either.
Oh, yeah. What are we holding in now? Almost on 1 week until the 2-week deadline for OG Anunoby, holding with bated breath to see if that actually holds up. We never know with this team and when injuries are going to resolve themselves. We don't know when Malachi Flynn's going to be back. He's got the strained hamstring. That was a big bummer on Sunday, Big V. I got to say, going into this one, it really kind of left the Raptors without much in the way of juice going into a game against a team that is really good defensively. You need some juice against. So let's dive into it, man. Again, I think the caveat here before we get into our big takeaways is that there aren't really that many big takeaways to be pulled from the last, 7 games since the All-Star break. They're 2-5 since then. They haven't had Fred VanVleet available for 5 of them. They haven't had OG for any of them. It's not the team that is intended to be on the floor. And yes, every team deals with injuries, but this Raptors team, I think, is specifically very much prone to getting sort of thrown for a loop by injuries because they exist in a very delicate balance, because they don't have a lot of shooting on the roster. It just amplifies itself when you lose 1 shooter, then 2 shooters, then 3 shooters. You get the freaking count, just counting up injuries on the team and laughing, and there's just nothing you can do about it. So Vivek, what are your big takeaways from last night's game against the Cavs, man? Is there anything to be gleaned from it?
No, not really. I mean, I guess I would say that if you're looking at it as a potential playoff matchup, which even now seems unlikely, you would say that, their size is just a major issue, to the point where it maybe even negates the experience advantage that the Raptors have. That's, again, with a healthy Jared Allen. We don't know what his status is going to be. Obviously, Shams Charania put out the report for The Athletic that he fractured his finger. So we're going to have to see what the timeline is on that. Changes things if he's not in the picture, but obviously the size is a huge issue for the Raptors to contend with. And then the dribble penetration of Darius Garland. And, maybe one of the overarching themes of the season that carries over into this one is it's one thing to be theoretically switchable, where you have all these 6'8", 6'9" guys who can theoretically defend multiple positions. But if they can't stay in front on the perimeter, they're really not that switchable then, right?
Right.
We've seen multiple defenders, whether it's Scotty Barnes or Chris Boucher, to an extent, even Pascal Siakam got blown by a few times. And so when all those guys are getting blown by, you're not that switchable.
Yeah, and I think I'd probably counter back a little bit and say that when they have OG and Fred available, it becomes a lot easier to kind of gear the matchups the way you want. And I mean, they have had success with these sort of tricky, slick guards this season, with OG kind of being their ace in the hole there, right? You think back to the crunch time of that Hawks game where OG was just thrown on Trae Young and was like, all right, it's time for me to swallow you up and end your world. And they just don't have that right now with OG unavailable. And obviously Fred's point of attack defense was not there out of the gate from the All-Star break, over those 2 games against the Hornets and the Hawks, because he's not 100% healthy. And you would hope that maybe he gets that, on-ball defense back to where it's supposed to be whenever he does get back in the lineup. But yeah, right now, they're struggling. That said, you mentioned that you want to, this.
Yeah, to be clear, I was talking about without those 2 guys.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah. And yeah, you go last night with the full 6'9" lineup, which I think I disagreed with, honestly. At least the iteration of it, I would have preferred to see Precious Achiuwa in there, maybe Thad Young. Thad Young's a weird one because he played poorly last night, really poorly. He was 0-4, didn't really do a whole lot, had 4 boards. But he feels to me kind of like a supercharged version of last year's DeAndre Bembry, where Bembry looked really good against playing alongside good players and looked awful playing alongside bad players, because he's like a connector for good players. That's really what the role for Thad is. So I would have liked to have seen him start, I guess. But either way, they were always going to be overmatched against this Cavs team without the players that they were missing. That said, they hung in pretty well. And as much as people were lamenting the third quarter, as they really, I think it was the 6:48 mark was the last bucket they scored in the third quarter. You look up,
they had cut it to 1.
Yeah, and they still won the quarter. They gave up 14 points over the quarter. The Cavs, to me, of all these teams in the Eastern Conference, I still maintain that the Raptors and Cavs are a lot closer than their records have shown all this season. The Cavs have their issues. They're not a terribly efficient offensive team, despite what Garland does. They're so reliant on Garland, and he's gotten to the point where they're the 19th best offense in the league, which is amazing. But without him, they don't really have a whole lot else in the way of initiation. As great as Evan Mobley is defensively, he's still not the ISO scorer that you kind of want as a secondary option. And so it's just, I think these 2 teams are very closely matched right now. And if they were fully healthy, this would be a kick-ass game, a kick-ass play-in game. If it was a 7-8, it would be incredible to watch as a series. Or March 24th, they play again. Maybe they'll be healthy for that one. That would be swell, because I just want to see these 2 teams at full health go head-to-head, because I do think there's a lot of really interesting matchup stuff going on here. As much as the Cavs present problems to the Raptors, I think the Raptors also present a lot of problems to the Cavs as well, with their size sort of at the non-traditional positions, where obviously the Cavs are loaded up with the regular spots. They are enormous and huge. But yeah, it's a bummer, because I just want to see these 2 teams go head to head in an actual sort of meaningful game, because none of the games they've played so far this season have had any of that. Yes, in early November they played a game, but Pascal wasn't back for that one just yet. And, it was a fun one. It came down to the wire, but it still wasn't these complete versions of these teams. Obviously, Boxing Day, you had the 4 replacement players and 4 deep bench guys, with Yuta Watanabe going off for 26 and 13 or whatever the hell it was. That game meant nothing, and I felt like last night's game meant nothing as well, which is a huge bummer. That said, on the point of it meaning nothing, it still feels like there's a tide of angsty Raptors fans kind of surging right now as a result of this 3-game skid. And I'm not just talking freaks on Twitter with eggs, right? People who I respect and like and appreciate and follow getting a little bit alarmist, I think, about where this team sits. They're 34-30. They're still well ahead of where we thought they would be. I think success for this season has in many ways already been achieved. Yet I see a lot of like tanking thirst and like, oh man, this team is broken. There's just no like the roster building thing has failed. Like way too early to make any of those declarations. You can have your thoughts and things like that, but as far as like tanking, it's literally impossible for them to do that now. They're 34-30. They're like 6 wins ahead of the Wizards right now, who are in 11th place. The Wizards might not have 6 wins in them for the rest of the season, right? Like it's not doable. And yeah, you can tank out and lose in the play-in and still have a lottery shot to move up. Guess what? What happened last year where you jumped up from 7th to 4th does not happen every year, especially when you have the 14th or 13th best odds. It's just not happening. So I don't know, man. I feel like the overarching sort of feeling about the team is way down on where it should be, considering the reasons, the very explainable reasons why things have gone awry here in the last week or so. I don't know. How are you feeling? Like, are you feeling the doom and gloom and despair that it seems like a wide sector of the fan base is kind of feeling right now?
No, to be honest with you, I actually
Yeah.
feel the opposite because to me, when they look at Fred VanVleet and say, okay, let's try and get this guy as close as possible to full health, when they look at OG Anunoby and say, let's get this guy as close to full health as possible, to me, they're thinking of the play-in and the playoffs. I think they feel fairly comfortable about where they are right now. Obviously, they'd like to move up the standings, but I think, they are thinking a bit long-term and, or I guess, just thinking about the postseason and saying, we need those 2 guys healthy because we're not going to do any winning without them. So
Yeah.
I think that's what's foremost for them. And I think last year was just a situation that presented itself. And Masai Ujiri has already said that. I think there's a lot of value to be gained from going into this postseason, hopefully winning the play-in and coming out of that and getting a playoff series for guys like Scotty Barnes and frankly, even for Pascal and Fred. There's a lot of value for them to go into the postseason and face, the schemes that will be geared to them, right? It never would have been, focused on them as much as it would be in this postseason. And so I think there's valuable lessons to be learned in terms of growing and fast tracking that development for the highest level. So for me, I'm concerned that as to whether or not they'll make the playoffs, because I think the play-in situation, can go either way. But I have no doubt in my mind that that is what they're trying to do.
Yeah, as they should. I think to your point, we've talked about this season as a fact-finding season, right? To figure out, all right, what works, what doesn't, and what is the sort of future composition of the team going to be. And if you go into this summer without the benefit of high leverage playoff games to actually draw conclusions from about what Pascal can do against defenses that are geared towards him and what Fred can do as a number 1 as opposed to versus a number 2 or a number 3 or whatever, you're going into the offseason with an incomplete evaluation. You don't have enough facts on hand to actually make proper decisions. And so I fully think they're in push for the play-in mode. I think it's preserve Fred and OG for those games when they really matter mode. They have a bit of a cushion over the Nets, who keep on losing games. They seem like they're going to be pretty comfortably in that 7, and there's still an outside shot at number 6, right? The Cavs have not played terribly well lately. They've got Jarrett Allen going down. There's one more Raptors-Cavs game to go, even with the Cavs already having the tiebreaker. So I don't think 6 is by any means out of the question. It's a long shot at this point, just statistically speaking, with 3 games to make up with 18 to go, but it's not like it's completely clinched or done or whatever. So
and them having the tiebreaker.
Yeah. So it's look, the doom and gloom is insane. Frankly, like it's fine. They're going not to be all on brand or anything, but like if ever it was fine, it's now after a stretch of games where they're looking kind of rough in a season where they've looked more often than not really exciting and tantalizing, and the roughness has come exactly coincided with injuries to very, very important players. we've gone too long in the first segment. We're going to continue on here. We're going to dig into the bench in just 1 second and whether there is some blame to be placed at the feet of Nick Nurse for the lack of options off the bench. We will get to that in 1 second here. But first, want to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar, who are making the best tasting protein bars money can buy. You got to check out Built Bar, man. I am someone who has a sweet tooth and a salt tooth and a snack tooth. And I often find myself around midnight being like, what am I going to snack on? I just like, I'm a little monster. I'm a goblin. Well, guess what? Instead of being a goblin, I am gobbling those Built Bars, baby, because they are a great alternative to the sweet and salty snacks I like to typically indulge in late at night. And they are good for me instead of being not at all good for me loaded with crap that I don't need in my body. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams of net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to your typical candy bar, which has at least 240 calories at minimum, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs as well. It just is no comparison. Do yourself a favor. Get yourself some Built Bars so you can have that indulgent snack without actually being indulgent. They got tons of great flavors for you as well. They got nut-free options for those of you who are have allergies to nuts, and they also have keto-friendly. All of them are keto-friendly, I should say. So go and check them out. Go to built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, get 15% off your order. That's the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. And we continue on here. Your first listen of the day. Ran a little long in that first segment here. I'm hot. But let's turn our attention to something that's not so hot, Big V, and that is the bench. Last night, a total of 8 points from the 6 different players who got into the game, including Armani Brooks making his triumphant debut on a 10-day to start the fourth quarter, no less, because why not? The only points on the night come from Precious Achiuwa, who himself was a minus 28. I don't necessarily think that tells much of a big story about Precious's game. Honestly, he had some moments, he had some bad moments. That's typically the Precious Achiuwa roller coaster you're riding. But you posed an interesting question before we hopped on air here, Big B, that I want to sort of entertain because you wanted to entertain it. And that is to do with the bench and the lack of options that are on it right now. The Raptors are they've bought in so hard to this everybody is 6'8" and can't shoot thing that they've left themselves with very little in the way of insurance when any of their shooters go down. And we're seeing that come to bear. And like the offense that they're playing is just grimy as hell. And I'm curious what you think about this, because you posed the question, Vivek. Like, where do you think, is there blame to be laid at anybody's feet for what the bench looks like and the lack of options that have emerged from it? Is it fair to really say that? Because at full health, I mean, Malachi Flynn has kind of emerged lately. Chris Boucher has had himself a great season. Precious Achiuwa has improved incrementally all season long. There have been success stories on the bench. They've just been thrust into starting duty quite often. Where are you at with the state of the bench and whether anyone is to blame for its, let's say lack of potency?
So I would probably start with the front office. I think when I look back on the 2020-21 season and some of the decisions that were made in building that roster, I don't think they had the vision of basketball being played the way they see it now. And
right.
And so if they had that same vision, I think certain decisions would have been made differently. That would have maybe accelerated where this roster is right now. And so that's where I'd start. The other part of it is, is Nick Nurse too harsh on the bench? Does he not give them enough run? And so a part of me looks at Malachi Flynn and says, it's easy to look now and say, oh, he got these opportunities and he made the most of it. But then I also look back on some opportunities that he got earlier in the season and he didn't take advantage of them.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I think of a stretch where in late November, he got 12 minutes against Memphis, 14 minutes against Indiana, 15 minutes against Boston, 22 minutes against Memphis, and really did nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And so he had a start against Philadelphia on December 28th, where he had 6 points on 2 of 12. Yeah. So there were opportunities there, and he didn't take advantage of them. I think of someone like Yuta Watanabe, who absolutely fits the mold of what this roster is trying to get from its players, but he hasn't taken advantage of the opportunity. And so I look down the line. Svi Mihailuk got a huge opportunity the first half of the season, right? He kept getting chance after chance after chance. And then it obviously didn't work out. So I do think that these guys have gotten opportunities. I mean, Delano Banton, he caught fire right at the very beginning. And then obviously once he became a known commodity and people knew that he couldn't really operate in the half court, then that became an issue. And so I feel like Nick Nurse gives opportunities. If there's maybe a criticism to be made with regards to the bench development, it would probably be, hey, do they stay in the doghouse for too long?
Right.
And could he be more flexible there? I think that is probably a valid criticism to be made. But I do think that for the most part, when I look at the last 2 seasons, opportunities have been given. When they've been taken advantage of, he's been happy to ride them. Right from the beginning, we saw that with Delano Banton. And when they haven't, guess what? You're going to the back of the line.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I don't know. I think if there's a criticism of Nurse, it might be that he can't change his sort of like base instincts as a coach. Like he is always trying to play for the win in whatever game it's in. And that's a great thing to have. It's how you win a lot of regular season games. But he doesn't adapt to the personnel when his guys who kind of know the whole deal, know the scheme inside and out, are not available. And then you have guys who are just thrust into it, and it's a lot to take on. So I wonder if those opportunities are harder to seize for guys like Utah or Malachi Flynn or whomever, just because it's such a difficult sort of thing to jump into, right? Like the defense is very intricate. The offense, even, they don't run basic pick and roll, right? It's a lot of dribble handoff stuff, a lot of off-ball movement, just because they have to try to grease the wheels any way they can. And it's a lot for a guy to step into and just kind of know all the spots to be immediately. So maybe that's the critique, is that he doesn't like pare things back when the personnel is not quite there. And I think that's a fair way to go. As far as like the front office's role in it, I mean, I think they've certainly undershot the need for shooting quite a bit off the bench. It's difficult to find shooting. Obviously, it's a premium commodity and everybody wants it. And they have a pretty decent track record of being able to teach guys to shoot. So I don't blame them necessarily for thinking they could do that with some of these guys. I also happen to think they might just be a little bit early in this sort of bench shadow core development phase, right? Like it took some time for them to put together that really excellent bench. They ended up having a good bench for most of their, like the Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan era, because like the Rudy Gay trade populated a bench for them they were able to kind of get by with, but like it didn't hold up against good teams at all. It wasn't until, 3-4 years into the build that they had a bench that was like, oh God, this is formidable. That's outscoring teams by like 10 points per 100 possessions when it's on the floor as a 5-man look. Like it takes time to build that up. And so I think there are pieces there to get excited about. Like I think the Flynn Precious combo as like a potential backbone of your second unit lineups is pretty interesting. I think Thad Young fits into this somewhere, and I think you can stagger in your starters because you have 5 guys who you feel pretty good about staggering in. It's just, I think they're a little bit early in the development stage. So it's a lot of different factors, as it turns out. No one's at full blame. I think, in some ways, the main guys being so good this season and putting things a little bit ahead of schedule left the front office in the lurch a little bit, being like, oh, damn, we did not prepare for the need to have a bench this important, because we didn't really think that we'd be in the ballpark of 40 plus wins and, punching for a potential 6 seed. Maybe that is kind of revealed in the way they've built this team as well. But, I do think that next season things project to be a little bit better, and the year after that a little bit better as well. Like there's still guys on this team who are so young, who have so much growing to do. We haven't even really seen Justin Champagny in months. Like he figures to be a part of it going forward too. He's shown some flashes shooting, which is a thing they desperately need. I do wonder if maybe in like their draft or undrafted free agent targets this year, instead of going for the typical long limber dudes who don't shoot, maybe they go for someone who's a little more of a proven shooter with nothing else to offer. I don't know, but What do you think of sort of the idea that, this is just kind of part and parcel with being a building team, and the fact that they're a little bit ahead of schedule with their main guys is kind of exposing this bench thing to be a problem when it really wasn't even supposed to be something that was worried about at the start of the season?
I think the ahead of schedule thing is definitely valid. One of the things Bobby Webster talked about after the trade deadline was how that 8-game win streak kind of hurt them a little bit, because other
Yeah.
teams, when they were shopping around Dragic and a first rounder, other teams were looking at that first rounder and kind of saying, this isn't what we thought it was.
Yeah.
And so, if they were still, a bit behind the 8 ball in terms of winning, then maybe you're able to get more value, right? And so I think that's fair. But still, I think in terms of their own expectations, I would say they're right around where they themselves would have expected to be.
Fair.
And when that is the case, if you expect it to be in the 7 to 10 range, maybe you didn't expect to, be this well over 500, and maybe you thought, you'd be flirting with that 500 mark, maybe a little bit below, but still in that 7 to 10 range. Maybe one thing you should have been more proactive about was trying to get that Dragic deal in the summer, right?
Yeah.
And so, the situation is what it is. You're here now. There's no running away from it. And so this is what it all boils down to is this is a very important summer, right? Because when you look at the contract extensions that have to be handed out, in terms of the opportunities to expand this roster's talent, this summer is going to be very, very important.
Totally. And look, I think because of the emergence of Malachi Flynn, if this can be a thing and actually sustain itself, I think the bench question becomes a little bit easier to answer because he does solve a lot of the problems, right? He offers some shooting. He can be off ball if you want to have Scotty or Pascal kind of be your backup point guard. And he offers ball handling and creation in a way that very few Raptors bench players have all season long. And so I think you're seeing the pieces come together. It's just, again, it's hard to evaluate it at all when they are unhealthy and don't have the lineups that in theory would be the lineups they're rolling with. And I still maintain like the main 5 guys start them and like when they're fully healthy, and then like Flynn with Utah and Precious and Thad and Boucher, and then whatever starter you want to sprinkle in, I am fine with that kind of being the rotation going forward. Ken Birch looked pretty good last night, had himself a better game, I guess. I mean, not really. He was a plus 20, but like, God, it's still rough. Maybe he gets excised from things. We can revisit that another day. But yeah, that feels like a good place to leave off the bench talk. We've gone a little bit long again. So we're going to come back to this side and quickly close things out with the dude of the game from Raptors Cavs. That's coming up in 1 sec. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at Bet Online. Football might be over, but basketball is in full steam. You've got pro and college hoop going really, really strong with March Madness just weeks away. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next coach who's fired is going to land. BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds. Eventually, you'll get some baseball in there. You'll have some futures NFL bets. You can go and look at overseas basketball and soccer if you want as well. No limit to the action you can go and check out at BetOnline. Go check out their website today. Use your mobile device as well and check out all the trends in action at BetOnline. It is where the game starts. And we round out your first listen of the day here with the dude of the game, the way we close out every episode of Locked On Raptors after a Toronto Raptors game, giving some love to an unheralded or perhaps very heralded player from the night before. Vivek, you're the guest. I'll turn it to you. Who do you got for the dude of the game? I'm putting you on the spot here. What you got?
Man, dude of the game, I am going to lean towards Chris Boucher.
I think that is the correct answer. What a night.
Yeah, and I think he's definitely someone who's trying to bring more offense to the table with the bodies that are unavailable right now. You could see his aggression in the last game against the Magic, and It's kind of carried over into this one. You hope that that 3-point shooting is coming through, because obviously the Raptors right now need all the threes that they can get.
Uh-huh.
And so even if he can just knock down those corner threes that he was getting the looks on, that'll be a big boon. Defensively, I think, there's a bit of a struggle right now, and there's more lapses than you'd like to see. But offensively, the Raptors definitely need him. And if he can channel the Chris Boucher we saw in Tampa, I think that would help a lot.
Yeah, they just need someone with some sort of unconscious energy to put up threes and hopefully hit them. He had 3 threes last night, half of the Raptors' total threes made, which is sure something. Boy, oh boy, just rough stuff last night, man. Again, totally unrepresentative of what the team actually is. It's a big time bummer. But Chris Boucher's playing really well, man. I'm liking the way that, he kind of felt like he went into a bit of a slump there, but the last few, it seems like he's kind of got it back a little bit, realized, okay, my role on this team is to be an energy chaos agent, and he's doing that quite well. The offensive rebounding, of course, is always wonderful. It really, like, the early game offense for the Raptors against the Cavs was basically, all right, let's get some Chris Boucher offensive rebounds and go, which was great. Love to see it. Let me ask you, because we have to continually always look forward here on the podcast, where are you at right now in the whole re-sign Chris Boucher or not conundrum, which the Raptors are going to come across this offseason? Not so far in the near future.
I would probably lean towards re-signing him.
Yeah.
Because, well, I think first of all, it's because he hasn't played well enough to price himself out.
Yeah.
And so I think that would be the primary case. And, at the level that he'll probably be expected, I think it'll be a fair contract for the Raptors to bring back. And again, he's one of the few guys that you've come to depend off the bench, right?
Yeah.
And so if you can bring any one of those guys back, you do it.
Yeah, I think I'm there too. Like, if you can get him for, something similar to what he's making right now, I think you're pretty happy with it. I don't think he's played himself into a position where he's going to be earning a whole lot more than that. And so as a way to continue to fill out your bench, that there's nothing wrong with bringing him back on a similar deal to do what he's done, because he's completely changed himself as a player this season to the point where I actually think he can be a contributor to some winning basketball, which was not a thing I thought before, the second month of this season. And that's been a great transformation for him. So shout out to Chris Boucher. Shout out to you, Big V, for coming to hang out on today's episode of the show. We will wrap it there. Any parting shots, any last words, or anything you'd like to promote before we get out of here?
One thing I would like to promote was a story I did on the Raptors sort of dealing with this crazy season and everything that's come their way. I spoke with the Raptors director of wellness and development, Alex Auerbach.
Awesome.
And so the story is out, and you can check out, everything that kind of goes on. Well, obviously not everything, because some of that stuff's got to stay private, but some of the big picture things that Alex has in
therapy
place.
Sessions in it.
Some of the big picture things, structures that the Raptors try to have in place to help the players and the staff get through a crazy 82 game season.
Hell yeah. Everyone go check that out at raptors.com. You can find me, of course, on Twitter at Woodley Sean, where you can, see all my dumb tweets. You can also go follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Raptors and subscribe on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. It's all free to subscribe, so please go ahead and do that. We're giving you free stuff. Why would you not want free stuff is what I have to ask. Also, just a quick note. We didn't really talk about Scotty Barnes on today's episode, which, hey, he was really good last night. 19-12-6 with 3 steals, 8 of 14. We love to see it, but it's because I didn't want to spoil anything coming up on tomorrow's episode, as Mark Schindler is going to stop by, and we are going to evaluate the race for Rookie of the Year between Evan Mobley, Scotty Barnes, Cade Cunningham. Is he in there? Is Franz Wagner in there? We're going to talk all about the Rookie of the Year race and the final stretch towards that award being decided on tomorrow's episode of the podcast. So you have that to look forward to on Tuesday. Until then, thank you so much for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. Go make your second listen Locked on NBA, as they are covering every single night of action across the league wonderfully over on that podcast every single night. So go and subscribe on all the podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And with that, we will talk to you again on Tuesday with another episode of Locked on Raptors. Bye-bye. I just punched the mic. Ow.